Welcome, one and all, to the High Performance Human Podcast. It's your boy Andy here, and I have got myself a fellow author from the Major Street stable. Steve Palise is joining me on this episode, and he is one interesting character, I have to say, in a completely great way. It's going to be a very, very different conversation, this one. Now, Steve Palise is a leading buyer's advocate based up in New South Wales, in Sydney. But he brings a very analytical sort of style to the way in which he recommends investments and whatnot through to his clients. He has a very analytical background going through engineering and is very educated in a numerical sense. But the way in which Steve attacks life is one of those methodologies that a lot of people feel either don't think is for them, or is impossible for them to achieve, or is just bullshit, really. It's just, how could anybody live that sort of life? And yet Steve manages to do it with a degree of humility and aplomb that allows him to really kind of hit home runs in whichever direction he's pointing the bat in, to be perfectly honest. And over the homework that I've done on him, I've got tremendous respect for how he goes about his game, with a tinge of envy, and that envy is in an entirely positive sense. Steve, a very warm welcome to the High Performance Human Podcast, man. How are you?
Quite an intro, thanks, Andy. I'm really well, thanks for having me on.
Oh, look, pleasure's all mine, mate. And since our first conversation, you had me intrigued, which is generally a good starter for 10. And then I did some more digging and discovered a bit more about you. And you are an interesting character, fella. You are a very, very interesting character, because to talk to you and to look at you from a purely professional perspective, you are at a level of professionalism that is undeniable, right? Your numbers, the way that you bring numbers into your strategies and what have you, it's very black and white, very analytical. So therefore, there's very little in terms of error margins and whatnot, right? Which is really, really good. I mean, I'm a big fan of that, engineering educator myself, so I have a bit of an affinity for that sort of approach. But the way in which you attack life you're quite a contradiction, really, because you're very altruistic with how you run your life generally. So before we crack on with the meat and veg of the podcast, do you find yourself almost having two sort of personas for the same personality?
Probably not. The what I kind of learned when my success started, it was when I actually just stopped caring so much what other people think and actually myself. For example, I hate wearing suits. I haven't worn a button-up shirt unless it's a wedding. I don't do it. So I wear t-shirts, and I've even had meetings with the directors of big supermarkets and stuff like that. And I turn up and I'm tatted up. I tell them t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops, and they're like, "Oh, thanks for dressing up." I'm like, "Would you be more impressed if I dressed up?" And they're like, "Probably not." I'm like, "Well, there you go." And I think it gives a level of, I don't want to say cockiness, but a level of arrogance in a positive way.
Mm.
If you don't care what they think, then it becomes about the service. Like you mentioned about the analytic one, because I'm ex-ed design engineer. You don't do a design with the calculations and then people say, "I don't like that design." They need to prove with the numbers what they didn't like about it. Why doesn't it, is there more efficient design? And that's kind of what I bring to investing and business and how I look at just life in general. However, not always a positive. Me and my partner always have arguments because I try to fix problems with solutions. And I've actually slowly learned that some people don't want problems to be fixed. They want to be heard. So that's the part of my life I'm actually working on, is actually listening to people as opposed to trying to fix problems.
No, mate. You run the risk of opening up Pandora's box with me with that one, because I'm very much in the same boat. When you think through proof, through social proof and business proof and success and whatnot, you feel that you know human beings, and then you realize you just don't in certain scenarios, right? Especially when it comes to partners and so on and so forth. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Anyway, before we crack on though, Steve, I really would like you to just give everybody a little bit of an intro into who you are and what got you to this point in your life, man, because you've hit some serious milestones over your trip.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'll probably give you two answers. The professional elevator pitch kind of one. If for my professional life, basically I run an investment buyers agency, which basically means I buy like investment properties that make good financial sense. The purpose of that is I effectively build people passive incomes. So it takes money and finance stress off the table. So that way they can find like their true north, like their purpose, their happiness. Like even our tagline in our email signatures on our website is invest in happiness. And that's the thing, because most people will chase a dangling carrot to get to a financial goal that we know does not bring you happiness. And this is just one of the coolest things about my job is because I deal with a lot of high net worth individuals. They're not any happier. If anything, it's the opposite. Like I actually find once you go over a certain level of wealth, they're really harrowed individuals, and they either chasing a carrot that doesn't exist, or they've sacrificed one of the other things. And I saw you've got like before segments of high performance. They sacrifice like something similar to that, like their health or their family or their relationship. You can't have it all. But then like, unless you're changing the world, once you get over a certain financial point, you're not changing your life. You just change the frequency of how often you do things. Like, I'll make up a number here. Like, you got a 250 grand passive income. You can do whatever you want. You can fly around the world, stay in hotels every single night for the whole year. You can't buy a private jet, definitely hire one. So after that, you just change the frequency of the things that make you happy. But yeah, I'm all about like, even my company is like, the first three things we ask on the call, like, what are you actually trying to achieve? What time frame do you want to do it in? And then for my business side is what finances do we actually have to work with? And the first two questions actually have nothing to do with money, surprisingly. So like, what are you trying to achieve is like, most people say, I want $100,000 passive income. Then the next question is, why do you want $100,000 passive income? And that really kind of unsticks most people. The common mind people say they want to travel. I go, okay, cool. I spent the last 2.5 years in Europe and I spent about 120 grand. So why do we need $100,000 passive income? Why not do it in half the time and get a $60,000 passive income? So I find when you unpack that, that kind of gives people's real purpose. And I know I've gone over the 30-second intro time.
No, mate. No, it's interesting. No, I really like it. And you're shining a bit of a light into the sort of little cracks that we want to go and delve into over the course of this conversation, which is awesome. So no, I love it. Why, what in your background had you heading down this path? Were you, up to a certain point, were you on that sort of standard trajectory, conveyor belt type of life? Or is this something that has always been prevalent in your existence when it comes to your ethos around all of this?
Yeah, I want to talk about this because I'm not like, if I'm not really introspective, I don't really think about it. I just always know that anything I do at 100%. So like, I've never half-assed anything in my life. If it's sport, I sign up to like the top level one. So recently I just did like, it's called High Rocks. It's kind of like a CrossFit competition.
Right.
Never done one, signed up to the pro version and then killed myself for 6 months training 7 times a week kind of thing. Same thing with like writing a book. I wrote the book word for word before I even sent it to a publisher. And then with work, I can't not finish a task well. And I don't know, and we can have a chat around the drivers around that. I had a chat with my partner before I jumped into this podcast because I was over time, and we actually think it comes down to a couple of things. First one was my parents were not allowed to be lazy kids in regards to like we did like the gardening. It'd be 35 degrees summer and we'd start at 8 a.m. and you have to go to 5 p.m. picking out weeds, trimming the bushes, mowing the lawn. Like there was no like, oh, let's just do an hour or two, then leave it. And then we played high-level soccer growing up. And then like I did really well in school, or 99.5 in school. Like everything has been do it really, really well. But never, and I want your thoughts on this as well, never aspiring to be someone or looking up to like some form of idol or motivation. There's something intrinsic, and I don't know if it's a nature or nurture thing, but that's maybe something we can explore on this counseling session.
Well, look, it's internal versus external motivation is something that really needs to be talked about a heck of a lot more because of the dopamine addiction that society has really got it's got a grip on humanity in a sense of we have foregone the ability to be able to be self-driven because there are that many opportunities to get that little spike of dopamine that gets you through the next 20 minutes or half an hour or whatever the case may be. There's a theory that started in 1971 called self-determination theory, and it's a fascinating little insight into the sort of three key pillars that go into creating internal motivation, internal drive, and so on and so forth. And one of them, I mean, you've got things like one of them's sort of environment and whatnot. There's the thing that you're talking about though is because this is where a lot of people have this argument of, is it DNA that makes people high performers, or is it a learned skill, or is it a mix of both? All right, because you can have these sort of cliched lines like hard work beats talent and talent doesn't want to work hard, for example, that sort of cliched analogy. And it's true to a certain extent. What it sounds like with yourself, which is really interesting actually, because some people would have heard what you just said then and instantly went to like OCD or something like that and tried to stamp you with something adverse, right?
I want to point out as well, Andy, like I'm not trying to preach here. Like this is also a negative for me as well, because with happens with the constant highs is you get the constant lows afterwards as well. So it's trying to find that balance. And even like we're talking before the podcast, like I've been like researching a lot on dopamine highs and lows and stuff like that. You can't plan for the highs, because if you plan for the highs, then it's higher and it crashes lower. So simple things I do now, like when I go to the gym, because I was always killing myself, I'd crawl out of the gym about the throat every single time, flip a coin. And if it's tails, I have to do a 50% session. So I don't get to like kill myself on this session. And that's to avoid the lows, because you can't have the highs constantly without the lows. And you see this a lot with like rock stars. They have the highs and relations, so their everyday life is actually boring. Like, so it was Jimmy Carr actually said that. He's like, my job makes my real life very boring. Because I go on stage and I'm admired by 5,000 people laughing at my jokes every single night. And I get back to everyday life where I'm bloody doing the dishes. That's nowhere near as exciting. His lows are lower as well. So it's trying to find that balance. And there's never a right answer. Like everyone's different. What you can handle, where your highs are, where your lows are. That's part of life as well.
Big time. I know. No, we are gonna dig into that, man, for sure. There's a couple of things in there that I want to ask you some questions about, which is really, really good. But before we crack on, as you alluded to, we do need to ask all of our guests what their definition of a high performance human is. I'm interested to hear yours actually. I've got those 4 elements: success, connection, influence, and happiness, and they all sort of live in a bit of an ecosystem where one can't survive without the other. What is your definition though, Steve? Because before you answer, team, one thing that he hasn't really mentioned is that he lives a life whereby his priorities, his true north, are sort of very defined very differently. And it's almost like, honestly, man, it's almost like a bit of a contradiction to what you were saying just then. How you're so driven to see things through to an absolute end, that could give you real tunnel vision, right? Which can mean that you can miss other things that are going on around you that could be really, really important to other people. But your ethos around everything is very much around the people that you love.
Yeah, and the lucky or slash good thing for me is, even though I'm actually really wealthy and my business does really well, I don't enjoy things. So it's like, I don't have watches, I don't have fancy cars. That's a $20 t-shirt that I'm wearing. I don't have fancy cars. I'm not actually spending my money on things. It's always experiences. It's like I mentioned before, like I've done like 50 countries now and I'm constantly gallivanting around the world. It's the experiences, which is the cool thing. And that sort of changes your mind shift with like earning money, because most people get it like, oh cool, I want to earn this dollar so I can buy this house in this location, and I want to buy this car. I didn't give a shit about that. And like it's cool. Can I maybe it will be, instead of flying economy everywhere, you fly business class everywhere. That might be like the next goal, but it's an experience. It's never an actual thing. And I've never got a thrill or a dopamine from things.
Yeah, fair. I can hear that. I can definitely empathize with that. So tell me, what's your high performance human definition?
All right, so I thought about this for a few minutes before the podcast because I want to get it right, and I want to emphasize a couple of words. So mine is someone who's intrinsically and honestly satisfied with their performance on a regular basis. So it's got nothing to do with like wealth, fitness, or as you see on those like inspiration guys on Instagram, like how hard you work and performance output and all that type of stuff. It's the two words I want to say is intrinsically and honestly satisfied with your performance on a regular basis. So that what I think is the high performance human, because if you're doing it sustainable, same thing with anything, Andy. Gym, if you do an 80% performance at the gym, but you do it for the next 50 years, you still beat the person who does 100% and only lasts 2 or 3 months and then takes 6 months off.
Yep, completely agree. So there's a part of that really does relate to consistency, which is something that a lot of people talk about. But the way that you've put it, the way that you've framed it, it's a lot more relatable. I'll be honest, which is really, really good. Explain the intrinsically and honestly satisfied. I've got my opinion on satisfaction, but before we delve into that, give me the interpretation of intrinsically and honestly satisfied.
Yeah. So this is where we spoke about true north and stuff like that. So it's got to be like, you actually have to be honest about, are you happy with it kind of thing. And a lot of people will say like, they'll win a medal at a competition, or it'll be like a jiu-jitsu competition or something like that. I'm into mixed martial arts, and you win gold, and you can still be like a little empty pit, like, oh, I didn't work hard enough kind of thing. I should have worked a bit harder in practice or blah, blah, blah. So it's not the outcome. It's just being honest. And like, you all know, like the quote, like, comparison is the thief of joy. And I used to be that person in my 20s. And the reason I've got a big property portfolio is because I was looking at these modals being like, how good do they have it? And went down that route for 10 years and built a portfolio and built the passive income. But I actually knew I wasn't happy. I was kind of doing it to be like, oh, I want to be like them. And then as I got closer and closer, to be honest, the void actually got bigger. I got more interested the closer I got to it, because I'm like, you'd think like an example would be, every time I bought a property, the first property I bought, I was over the moon. I was like, this is awesome. I'll go on the property ladder. Then the second one, you're like, yeah, this is great. It goes 2. And then you got 3 and you're like, cool, I'm making waves here. And it got to the point where like I was buying number 6, 7, 8, 9 and almost dreading doing it. Like you'd sign another contract and you're like, oh, bloody hell, I've just bought another property, another bloody headache, blah, blah. And all of a sudden the happiness shifted away, because it started getting to the point where it wasn't changing your life. And you're just doing it for some random reason to say, you can say, I've got 10 properties or whatever it is. And again, this is probably we talk about, like, then my job is to build wealth for people, so then they don't have to worry about wealth and they actually can look what makes you happy. We all know, like, you've seen every celebrity quote about, like, which was a Jim Carrey one, I wish everyone was rich and famous so they could realize that's not the answer. Yeah. Everyone sort of knows that wealth doesn't bring happiness. So why are we chasing it so hard with jobs we don't like and things like that? So that's sort of what I mean by the intrinsic and honestly. It's like, it's actually when you look at yourself in the mirror being like, I'm being true to myself here. I'm not doing it, please. My dad, my mum, my partner, my friends, some mogul on Instagram I don't care about. Like, it's just an honest reflection of yourself.
And that's easier said than done, though, right? And I think that's one thing. But it's one thing that is very symptomatic of society these days is creating enough space to actually understand what your identity is. There's that many different agendas and identities being thrown at us now, like, and fired left, right, and center, right? So to be able to, 1, find your own identity, and then 2, keep hold of it, it's very, very difficult.
It'll change though, Andy, over time, because it's not the same. And one of the, like, she said this on another podcast and actually performed really well when they made a reel out of it. I said, you can't be happy all the time. And then when I said it, the podcast guy was like, what do you mean? I'm like, if you're happy all the time, you're no longer happy, because that's, like, in engineering terms, that's the equilibrium. So to be happy, you actually have to be ecstatic. So there's always a level. So you can't be happy. You actually need the highs and lows. And like, I've been through divorces and you had all that, and you end up happier from the bad experiences. So you need the lows. Obviously, trying to minimize the really big troughs is the hard part. But it's like, my mum passed away a year ago from dementia. Like, that gives you clarity. So a horrible situation brings joy later on to the smaller things. Seeing your daughter laugh. Like, so you need the lows. You can't be happy all the time.
I agree with that. It's a shame though that and I said this on an episode earlier on. It's a shame that we as humans need to hit a trough in order to go and achieve a better peak.
Yeah.
Like, why can't we have yes, you do need to appreciate, in order to appreciate the highs, you need to experience lows, so sort of give you that grander perspective. But it's a shame that we need to hit a wall to get that absolute clarity. It would be great if we didn't have to do that in order to find one or two of those things, but we always seem to. The greater clarity comes from greater adversity, I guess. But
Like they actually think, I've listened to a few podcasts on, they actually think it comes from an evolutionary sense of the hunter-gatherer type scenario where if you weren't driven, and this is where most people have like their drive, if you weren't driven and hungry, you wouldn't go out and search for food and get that big win. So you actually need that dopamine fix to get the hunt. And you also don't know when it's going to come. And you also need to feel that low to be like, I need to change this to go out and get some food. So there's probably an evolutionary side behind it, but any of my friends that are on antidepressants, the biggest concern and comment about it is they just feel nothing all the time. So they've removed the low, but they don't feel the highs either. But like I said before, you want to minimize the lows, but people are going to die, people are going to get sick, your life's going to change, relationships are going to break down. The highs get better after those as well.
there was a really cool comedian that I listened to, and he was a guest on another podcast. It's always comedians that come out with some of the best stuff. And he said he was on head meds, and he sort of came to the conclusion that he can either be on the head meds and be like 100-watt bulb all the time, or he can learn to cope with the highs and the lows and have greater moments of being in 1,000-watt bulb, or having the ability to be in 1,000-watt bulb and be shining a lot brighter. In order, and he felt that the payment of experiencing the lows was worth those moments of being an 1,000-watt bulb as opposed to just being a dim 100-watt bulb consistently. And it makes sense. I mean, I'm still on medications and what have you, and it's something that I'm considering at the minute is because you always think when you're in this sort of situation, you always think, and it doesn't matter whether it's medication or circumstance or whatever, if there's something that you feel is limiting in order to maintain existence, it does make you wonder, well, geez, if we did this much in this situation, imagine what we could do if, right? And then there's that inherent trade-off as to whether it's worth going down the path or not. But I want to talk to you because we've touched on it, right? And you've mentioned a little bit about people's perception of success and how it is portrayed in society by your Insta famous people and so on and so forth. Now, I'll preface this before we start this conversation. I know that a few of you will have been listening to Steve and saying, oh, geez, how sad can you be having 10 properties and all that sort of stuff? Get off your high horse, blah, 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 blah. But everything is very much circumstantial, right? And for Steve, he has numerically seen a heck of a lot of success. But as we all know, team, numbers aren't everything. So, Steve, as you've been discovering this for yourself, how has success evolved from you, from what it was when you were in your 20s to how you perceive success now?
Yeah, okay, good question. So it's funny you mentioned though about like the 10 properties and that. So when I was building the portfolio and I got to like a really successful point, I was actually the most miserable I was in my life. Like through a divorce, I wasn't happy with work. And that's sort of what we talked about before. It gave me the kick up the bum. And that's like, well, it's been engineer. I just throw it in. I was like, stuff it, moving to Europe and went overseas and started my business in Australia from Europe. And I did the first few years overseas. So like you said, the wealth we know doesn't actually bring the happiness, which kind of answers the question is, I was chasing a numeric goal, being engineer and following the property moguls of like, if I get to 100K passive income, I will then be happy. I got to the 100K passive income and guess what? I wasn't happy. I was actually sadder because it took the wealth goal off. Like chasing a goal is fun. Like that's That's like any sport and chasing a medal or whatever it is. Chasing the goal is really fun. And then we got there and it was kind of like, shit, what next kind of thing? What do I do now? And I was actually probably unhappier because of it. So
Yeah.
you get that low. And then that's when you start going down the rabbit hole of like, okay, success is actually like, I'm going to use the same word actually, intrinsically and honestly happy with yourself. So it's like actually being satisfied with what you're doing. And that comes from a vast things, health, wealth, fitness, friends, like there's all that. And then the 4 ones you talk about as well. But yeah, it's just, and so I don't think you can actually define it because it's going to shift over time as well. You're going to ask me in 5 years' time if we do a follow-up podcast, I'll probably give you a completely different answer.
Here's a question for you. It's a little bit chicken and egg. A lot of people chase success in order to be happy. But you could argue that in order to be successful, you need to be happy in the first place, right? And it is very much which came first, the chicken or the egg. But your take on happiness is very interesting, I think, just based on what I know about you, because you've done a lot of travel. You continue to travel. You are not restricted by conformity, okay? And that comes with understanding your own identity and being comfortable with said identity, right? And you know that it's going to change. So you've not got, and one thing that I really think you should write down in your notes, team, is that Steve has mentioned on a couple of occasions, very, very, in a very sort of small way, but he's mentioned it 1 or 2 times, that he knows full well that his identity is likely to evolve and alter and change over the course of time. And the beauty of that is that he's not going to be white knuckle. He's not going to be so gripped on who he is now, because he is accepting that who he is now may not be who he is in a few years' time. That's a really interesting concept when you talk about happiness, right? Because I think one of the things that prevents us from being happy is this notion that we are, what's the word? Almost fixed beings. Once we know who we are, that's who we are. And in a way that it is portrayed in society and whatnot, when people are looking for their true north, you mentioned the whole true north thing, North Star. I think one thing that we perhaps need to really inject into the common vernacular is the fluidity of our identity. Now, is there been a situation where where your identities felt really, really challenged, and you've thought, you know what? I actually need to look at this and actually look and use this as an opportunity to alter my identity. Because in order to see that, you need to be comfortable and happy with where you are in order to have that level of open-mindedness, shall we say. But for a lot of people, coming back to my original point, for a lot of people, they feel that they need to be successful in order to have permission to be happy. So 2 parts of this. One, was there in a situation where you had your own identity was challenged tremendously, and how did you identify that, and how did you move forward? But also, how did you generate this baseline of happiness, this equilibrium that you do have? Because the way that you live your life is you very much make sure that life works for you. Yeah, it's your universe, as Alan Watts puts it. As opposed to you working for the universe.
The first question, that's actually a really good one. Where like my identity actually changed. I used to lie quite a lot, like 15 years ago when I was younger, before I was successful. I used to always embellish like what I was doing. I'd say like if I was working on a $10 million engineering project, I just naturally would tell people 15 mil. Big, like 4 properties, and I was on a night out chatting to randoms, you'd say 6 properties, and just like little stuff in your head, you're like, this is the white lie. And then when I actually got the wealth, now it's actually the opposite. I try to actually avoid it because I want people to kind of like respect and love you outside of the finance thing.
Yeah.
That was a really cool shift of like, okay, first question is, why am I lying? Why I think, and that's also part of the drive is like, if obviously was yearning for more, whether that be love, respect, admiration or something like that. And it got the same as I went down my personal Instagram and socials. you'd go have all these cool experiences and I'd take photos and you'd get the feel good when people like comment, oh, you live in the life, Steve, blah, blah, blah. But I actually found that takes away now. Every time I travel and you think, oh, this will be a great Instagram shot. People will love this. That's already automatically taken away from the experience. Well, present, you're like worrying about what someone thinks. So that shift, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly, but that shift I've actually felt once I took wealth off the table. And you kind of mentioned in the prelude to that of like success, what makes someone successful. I want to clarify when I say success, and probably even when you say success, it's not business success. They're two different things. There's plenty of people that run really small time successful businesses and they don't have a lot of money and they're actually happier. And then there's people that work in big corporate, make tons of money and they're not happy. So success is, like I said, being that intrinsic kind of happy part of yourself and then finding yourself. And now I've spoken too much. I forgot what the second question was.
So it's basically, how did you become comfortable with yourself in order to be content enough to then use that? Because happiness is a superpower, right? You can be way more successful or really kick on a heck of a lot more if you're happy in yourself, right? Yeah. And you mentioned that you've gone from suit wearing to t-shirt and boardies and whatnot, right? And in order to do that, you need to have become very happy with who you are as an individual, right? And because you've mentioned it as, I don't care what people think, but realistically, it's not a fact that you don't care what people think, because that is arrogant. You're not arrogant. You're just really content and comfortable with who you are.
You're always going to care what people think. Otherwise, you are arrogant. There's no empathy then. But you need to care about what the right people think. And this is how I'm going to actually answer the question is, to be honest, my partner is the one, because she calls out the bullshit. When you're trying to lie to yourself, she'll call it out. So like before I went overseas, I'm like, oh no, I can't go overseas. I've got a new book coming out. It's going to be the busiest time. She's like, why did you build your portfolio? I'm like, well, because I want to travel. She's like, well, there you go. And then same thing, like whenever I talk about like, okay, this probably is something like so much. I actually don't enjoy work, surprisingly. And I work pretty hard. I don't enjoy the grafted. I get caught up in it like everyone else, and I think. And then the same thing, my partner knows I don't like work. So whenever I'm like, oh, it's 4 p.m. and I'm like, oh, I got another couple hours work to do. She's like, well, no, you said you don't enjoy work. You said your ideal work week is 10 till 4 days a week. And she calls me out like, no, laptop closes. There's no exceptions. This is the rule. Whereas I can see when you don't have someone kind of in your corner that you trust like that, you go down the slippery slopes of work until 2 a.m. like I've done in the past and things like that. So I think having someone in your corner, and it doesn't have to be a partner, be a friend, family member, mentor, but someone just to call out your bullshit. I think it's probably the thing. No one's perfect. I'm not perfect. I've been through relationships, divorces, certain friends, like everyone else. But having someone you trust and there's no judgment is probably the best thing for you.
It's interesting that you've said that, because success, it is true that success is not a solo trip. You can't, I'm going to be careful how I say this. Realistically, you can't be successful in the truest sense of the word without having some level of accountability from someone at some stage, right? There is no one human that is infallible or impervious to making mistakes or not seeing something or being ignorant to certain facts or materials or whatever it is, right? And which kind of makes it really, really interesting, because society's been banging on about self-development, personal development, self-awareness, self, which is realistically has kind of coached a lot of people into trying to do everything for themselves, by themselves, to themselves, right? And what I think is a really, really good distinction. That's a really good way of answering that, man, to be honest, because it brings very much to everybody's attention that's listening to this, the fact that in order to be successful, we know we're going to make mistakes. But in order to be able to learn from those mistakes to the fullest of our extent, we need someone to be able to call them out or spot them or help us to navigate through them, because otherwise we're just going to keep making the same mistakes.
I also think there's another layer to it. It's the accountability and duty to others as well that brings up. And a lot of people, we spoke prior to this about like kids, like they don't give you anything back. Like for the first 15 years, you get an I love you unit, but then actually when we did the prenatal classes before you're expecting your first child, and CPR and do all that, the midwife actually said something that really resonated with me. She's like, it's the accountability and duty to the baby that brings the love. So if you get a perfect baby, you don't love it as much as, and we spoke about the highs and the lows. If you have the bad times where my daughter's been up all night, and then you get the giggle in the morning, it's like, blows your hair back kind of thing.
Exactly, like whatever, I don't care.
The same as my partner always laughs because I always compare our daughter to a dog. Same as when you get a dog and then they finally behave themselves, you get the feel good of that. But if they're just a normal, well-behaved dog, you kind of go like a boring kind of thing. So it's having the person like you mentioned that you trust that gives you kind of the guidance, but then also accountability. I think Jordan Peterson, I know he's a bit of a controversial character, but like he says that for kids, he's like, it's the accountability for kids that gives people purpose. And people work as well with their employees or their charities or their partner being like a provider or whatever it is. But you need some accountability to get that happiness high as well.
I love that. Accountability and duty brings love. That's mint. That's your snippet. Social media crew, that is the snippet right there. Accountability and duty brings love. Yeah, just as a little side note with those prenatal classes, how much did the videos freak you out?
Oh, yeah. The biggest one for me was just like you're going through all the CPR and choke hazards and stuff. You're like, I'm getting out of my depth.
No, man, honestly, we made the mistake of clicking on the YouTube links of what was sent to us, and I don't scare easily when it comes to films and things like that. But even I found myself like hiding behind a pillow at one point. Wow, like seriously, the amount of respect that you just grow instantly for women when you see that shit is just insane. Like it's just absolutely insane.
It also made me realize we are animals when it comes down to it. When you see it, like we're actual proper mammals.
We are carnal human beings, right? We are a species. We are not something other than. Geez. Anyway, before I go down that horrific rabbit hole that puts me in a cold sweat, now what we've sort of stumbled across here, gang, is something that I wasn't really expecting, but I really like, is because I think in order to be able to understand the need for accountability, we first need to appreciate and again, I come back to the whole thing of becoming accepting and comfortable with the things that we've not got, as our imperfections, right? The things that make us susceptible to mistakes and what have you. We mentioned before we hit record, you mentioned that you are learning within yourself to be able to actually take on board what people are saying to you to a much greater extent. And that really, you can only really find that out when someone whacks you in the face with it, right? You think you can, and you can relate it to, I've been through divorce as well. And probably part of the contribution towards the breakdown of relationships is you hear people, but you don't listen and you don't actually take the information in. From your side of things, how are you developing that skill within yourself? What are the sorts of things that you're developing within yourself when it comes to this imperfection that you've recognized within yourself?
It's funny you say it. So like, it's hard when you become successful in business because everyone just blows smoke up your ass the whole time. And all my competitors, like I've known them before they were successful, they've all turned into arrogant twats. Like, because they've just had this admiration on social media and the team have been putting up in the gospel and they go from there. I think I've been lucky because my partner came from humble beginnings and I grew up with humble, and I've still got the same friend group. So they kind of call it my BS pretty early on. But like you said, it's still a learning progress, and I try to talk honestly with people, and I still struggle. I actually struggle to talk negatively about myself in regards to anything, in regards to like mum passing away or my relationship with my dad and family and my ex and things like that. And that's just something that you just kind of work on every day, like going to the gym. You don't go and try to lift 100 kilos straight away, bench press. You do your 20, and then you go to 30, and then you go to 40. So I'm slowly chipping away with that just by having good people in my life. And you can get professional help as well if you need.
So with that though, you said that you're sort of taking things gradually, and you're looking to make incremental improvements over time. One thing that I think can really prevent people from continuing that progress is how they process a setback when they're going along this trip. You know, you could point towards, you know, addictions and things like that. You know, when people have a big breakdown, if, you know, alcoholics, they'll go so far and then they'll have one drink and think that that's it, and then the whole thing will fall apart because they've just had one. Instead of just giving themselves a little break maybe and just saying, well, just one drink, it's okay. You don't need to punish yourself. Have you found yourself sometimes becoming really, really critical of yourself at times?
No, but I need to be. So it's probably not the answer you're expecting. I'm still fight the constant urge to be a high performance human. Like I said, every single time, like I just be very high, like fitness competition. Even with work, you look at like doing really well and you're like, cool, how do we increase profits by 20% next year? And how do I do more family trips away? And how do I do this? Like, it's a constant battle. So I'm actually going to say the opposite. I'm actually striving to be satisfied with less, which is a weird kind of way. I've never actually said it that way before. There we go. Yeah, I'm trying to fight the urge to stop trying to be a high performance human, which will hopefully make me high performance happiness.
Do you feel that it's almost an addiction to keep striving for? We've mentioned the word satisfaction quite a lot, and I had my own battles with satisfaction until my old man passed away, and I didn't get a chance to ask him if he was satisfied with everything he'd done in his life. But because of that, it sort of hit me in the face that I'm chasing satisfaction and I'm never happy, because whenever we get there, becomes somewhere else, and you know, there never exists. Do you find that, off the back of what you just said there, smelling of roses is something that you have a massive problem with?
Yeah, spot on. Yeah. So I'm always thinking about the next thing or the highest level thing I could do. If I think there's a bunch of roses, I'll be like, cool, how do I smell 100 of them in the next hour, kind of thing. It's always got to be pushing the envelope. One of the things I want to mention actually on this podcast, because it's probably good for your listeners, is especially with financial wealth, and I imagine people do this with their personal lives as well, people always exponentially grow what they think makes them happy. So like the biggest one I get is like people will first come to me and say, I want a $50,000 passive income so my partner can stop working, so we can just be a one house income family. Then what very happily becomes is they get that, and the next one becomes 100,000. So it actually doubles. And the next goal 5 years later becomes 200,000. So they go, oh, then it doubles again. And when you keep doubling, it becomes unattainable. You do that 10 times and all of a sudden they need a $10 million passive income and they're never actually satisfied. So part of the reason I'm saying that is I've stopped trying to do that and bring it back to a more linear progression of life. And like you said, stop and smell the roses while you're on the lake. Kids have been awesome for that. And we spoke about this before the podcast. Like, there's, especially the first year where you go and sit in a park and there's nothing to do besides click some blocks on the ground and crawl around. That is definitely the smell of the roses and keeping the simple life. And I struggled with that first 6 months. I'd sit there thinking about work and doing other things. And it takes time to actually find a zen and finally actually chill out.
And that's where, you know, and you mentioned it very, very briefly. It's not the drive that you have. It isn't all positive, because we as human beings, we do need that downtime. And even though Steve did go traveling around Europe, he still started a business from scratch while he was in Europe, right? So it's not like he went around Europe and just sat on a beach the whole time. And it can become a tremendous negative. It can become very, very counterproductive when you do feel that necessity to keep trying and striving and going for it and all this sort of stuff. Because in order for, and coming back to your point, the point that you made quite rightly about success not being a solo trip, if we don't sort of have the ability to be able to at least slow down our pace, then we can't possibly expect people to keep up with us, especially our loved ones. And that's when we end up creating a separation of ideals, of goals, of which, and it should be a collective. Like, when you are working as a team, whether it's with a partner or whatever, in business or in life, there has to be a team element to it. And if you're the one that is constantly sprinting, then it is impossible for the people that you are accountable to be able to keep up, which then creates cracks in that team that then turns into chasms that then leads to breakdowns of relationships and so on and so forth, because they lose sight of you. And we've got to be mindful of that, right?
That's the words I use. So the accountability and duty to someone else can be, and it seems harsh, those words, like, because people don't want to feel like they're a job, like you're doing something all then. But it is. If when you get down the rabbit hole working too hard and you see your partner loneliness going up, you're like, well, I'm not serving them well. And I've been a bad thing for that. So like anytime I finish a task, if there's like, let's say I finish work at 3 p.m. and I'm like, oh, cool, I've got an extra hour and a half. I then come up with something else to do. I'm like, oh, I haven't done a course on my book. I've got a third book coming out in January. Like, I fill the void with that work. Whereas I should have just been like, surf looks pretty good. Should go for a surf. So like you said, that's a constant battle. But having someone or something there that you're accountable for that's not business success will actually bring more happiness in the long run.
Before I let you go, man, I just wanted to ask what your opinion was for those people that haven't got kids, and they might not even have a partner, right? So they are flying solo. When we've talked about success not being a solo trip, yes, you could go to mentors and family and so on and so forth, but I think a heck of a lot of individuals, especially in that Gen Z period, in that Gen Z sort of generation, a lot of them feel like really quite lonely, off the back of society banging on about these big macro challenges that society insists that you spend your time focusing on, and then as a result you lose track of self, lose track of who you are, and therefore you become very, very lonely internally. Based on your own experiences and your own lessons, what would be your advice to those people that really don't feel that they have anyone in their corner?
Well, that's actually a good question, and I'll tell a bit of a story actually. So there's so I run a buyer's agency, and there's a younger guy who's only a couple of years into his buyer's agency, and he always messages me. He's like, "Oh, Steve, you live the life you like. I want the dream of blah, blah." And then I always see on his socials, he'll post a social of him working late on a Saturday night, and I kind of write back. I'm like, "Well, I thought you said you wanted my life, like the relaxing travel." Yeah, but I need to do this to get there. And I'm like, well, it's kind of counterintuitive, like trying to live a life that you don't want to get the life that you do want. And that's always the balance, I think, with goals. But if you're missing someone, you need to find it. Like everyone knows, loneliness is actually the biggest thing. And like me and my ex-wife, we left because I felt lonely when I was in the same room. So like she was actually a high performance human. She was an anesthetist, like high-level doctor. But you'd sit there being like, I don't feel like I'm with someone. So you got to find someone. Doesn't have to be a partner, friend, family, business associate. It can be a mentor, but just reach out. You'd be surprised who actually talks to you.
And I think that's probably part of the trick. I was having a conversation with a lad who's been having some serious mental health issues recently, and he'd only recently got married. We'd done a bit of work together, and then he dropped off the face of the earth. So obviously, naturally, you start to get a bit concerned. And then he randomly popped up last week, and thankfully, and reached out to us, and we had a bit of a yarn. And that's the one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that however lonely you think you are, the reality is it's always likely to be somewhat different. You know, we've not we've not been brought up as hermits, right? We've not been brought up without family or school people, or every single human has been brought up with humans around them. And so even if you don't think that there's anybody in your life or anybody that you've met that will care, ultimately there will be someone that will, and there will be someone that will miss you, and there'll be it's like what Francesca Dean, who's one of my favorite podcast episodes that I've had, cerebral palsy warrior, and her definition of high performance human is just to keep turning up, because someone wants to see you. Yeah, and I thought that was so profound. And for a lot of people, those challenges, I mean, her challenges she's had her whole life, right? And but for some people, challenges around loneliness and whatnot can feel like a bit of a dead end, when ultimately, if all you did was turn up, then you need to see that as a win. And off the back of that win, you can then pick up another little win, which would be to say hello to someone. I'm really conscious that this conversation, which has been absolutely tremendous, will make some people that are feeling quite lonely feel even more lonely. If that's the case, gang, then you can reach out to me, or reach out to Steve, or you can reach out to anyone. You can reach out to anyone, because someone will listen. And realistically, if success could be, success for you one day could just be to turn up. And if that's the case, then sweet. Because as mentioned in Steve's in Steve's definition, honestly satisfied with your performance, not your performance compared to anyone else's, your performance based on your circumstances. So as Steve mentioned, he's very, very lucky to have a partner that that clearly keeps him on the straight and narrow with respect to life and all the rest of it. But if you have no one, remember that there will always be someone, because unless you have lived your life in a dungeon somewhere by yourself, being fed through the door, you will have connected with someone that will want to care. All right. So if that's your challenge, then reach out. Very, very mindful of that, because this conversation has been so good. And I think that it will open up a couple of battle scars for one or two people, maybe.
I love the just turn up thing. So funny enough, whenever I get asked who my hero is, there was one of my mates who had cystic fibrosis. So he passed away at 40, so he passed away a few years ago now. Saying he just turned up. So there was nothing high performance about him. It was high performance compared to he had 20% lung function his whole life, and still played touch football, soccer, went on trips, went on ski trips, and he just turned up every single time. And he's the guy I aspire to, the guy who just turned up every single time.
Yeah. Amazing. Steve, this could be a series, let alone one conversation. And I'll be very, very honest with you, man. I feel a very strong connection with how you're rocking and rolling. And I say that with, for me, it's one of the highest compliments I could give. I feel that you are a chap that does very much live life with everything on your sleeve, that understands his imperfections really, really well, understands the consequence of those imperfections, which I think is very, very important. It's one thing to know what your imperfections are. It's another thing to understand how that can impact other people and those around us and ourselves. And I think you've clearly done a hell of a lot of work. And that's what it takes. It takes work to work that out and to become a student of yourself, which you clearly have. And I've got so much respect for that, like massive amounts of respect for that. Before I let you go, there's always one question that we ask, and we might have already alluded to it, but in your pursuit of your next version of high performance, Steve, what is the one thing that you are working on right now? We might have already alluded to it, but what is the one thing that you're working on?
Being satisfied with less performance.
Yeah. So good. So good. And for a number of you listening to this podcast, that is something that will resonate with you tremendously, as it has done with me.
It is hard though, Andy, because like we got constantly on socials, and I've mentioned this before the podcast. Like I don't want to badmouth people, but like I hate the Grant Cardones and the Tony Robbins, and they talk about 10x this, 10x this. We all know that doesn't bring happiness. So why are we striving for like just try to be aim to be satisfied? If 10x brings the satisfaction, great, but ask the question before that first.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and it's one of the inherent issues of society's leadership. Realistically, the loud people, and I would like to think I'm powerful. I would like to think that in a lot of instances, the motivation is to benefit society with your knowledge, awareness, and energy and enthusiasm and all the rest of it. We know there's a profitability around a lot of the stuff that a lot of those people do, and one of the reasons that they are so profitable and successful as leaders or coaches or trainers or whatever you want to call them is because they don't give away the whole story, and therefore it creates a gap in knowledge that makes people want to come back and listen for more, which is fine. You know, at the end of the day, it's a business.
I do it in my business. There's no judgment.
Yeah, it's a business.
You sell the dream, and that brings business. Yeah,
exactly. But team, as Steve mentioned, it's got to be within the context of who you are. It's got to be within the context of who you are. Because if you've not got that, then and if you've not got an awareness or you don't understand the context around you of what's going on around you, then you will be forever trying to live someone else's dream. That's no good. That's no good. It's a quick way to become lonely. Very, very lonely. And having got the t-shirt on that one team, I'd highly recommend you don't go down that path. Steve Palise, man, this has been I knew it was going to be a good conversation, but this is a conversation that I wish I could continue on. And I'm sure we will.
No, this is awesome. Thank you.
Team, this is one of those episodes that you might want to go and have a cup of tea after this, or a cup of coffee, and it's some sort of hot brown, I would suggest, and just go and chill for 5 minutes and process things for a little bit. If you do have any concerns or questions, you know that there are official channels that you could go through. But if all you wanted to do is just drop us a DM, you're more than welcome to. That isn't a play for attention. That is very much a case of if you want to DM privately, feel free, and we'll be more than happy. The door will be open. Team, until next time, though, stay safe, healthy, happy. On behalf of Steve and myself, look after yourselves and each other. We'll speak to you again real soon.